Thanks everyone for having me. I'm not a podium person, but I'll try to move a little bit and not be too noisy for all of you. Thank you for making the time, and I know taking any time out of work is very complicated, but this topic is very close and dear to my heart. So before we go on to the slides, which don't necessarily speak to themselves, I have a question for you, or maybe 3 questions for you. Would you, and this is for me to get a pulse of who you are, would you agree that execution is greater than or equal to a vision? Well, there's some hands that didn't raise, okay. How about culture is actually created and not let be, and you kind of define it on its own? Oh, that's even better. That's great. And maybe the last one would be around prioritization, but when you prioritize, do you prioritize based on things that people tell you they want, or the things that they tell you that they need that they don't have yet? Which one would it be, A or B? B? Yeah, so when I speak to this, there's a lot of theory here, partly because you're coming from so many different industries. Any examples that I shared with you may or may not resonate. So I'm hoping that I'm giving you some thought process that you probably already think about in a maybe slightly structured manner and maybe somewhat geeky manner, but we'll get there. And then when you ask the questions, we can try to articulate how it might apply a bit more. So I'm going to quickly go to this, and let's see if I can do this right. So I don't know how long I've had this slide. I think maybe 8 years or something like that. When I think of digital, this is what I think of, a muddy pathway. No, here's why it is. So someone, somewhere, it looks like there's a parking lot in the back corner. There was someone that actually put some thought on the architecture of this, right? Some landscape person that said, I want this to be a very nice, pristine, green piece of land. I'm going to make sure that the sidewalks are very perpendicular. It's nicely cut. It's going to look really nice because there's going to be a proper rectangle. We'll even put a tree that shows some shade. If you want to sit and have a picnic, you can. Very thoughtfully done if you think about it. And from a point of view of architecture, there's nothing wrong with the story. Nothing at all. So someone who was building this believed that the criteria for success was the aesthetics of the land and the perpendicularity of the space in hand. And they went off and they built it. So from their point of view, everything is great. But what happens is the person that's walking from this corner to that corner, which is not that much of a distance, right, a couple seconds, they decide, well, I don't need to take that right turn over there. I can literally just walk across. And I walk across, and someone else walks across, and to the point where the grass stops growing in that area because the user wants to walk across. And that is what their requirements are. It wasn't that I want to take a nice, pretty little path and enjoy the green on the tree. It was I need to go across to the parking lot, probably. I'm assuming that. But then when that happens, of course, you can then see that the person is the landscape owner, or perhaps someone who's in charge of that space says, please use the sidewalk. Please make the effort to not make this look so ugly because we put so much effort in making it look perpendicular. And now we're creating a hypotenuse for no reason whatsoever. But that little sign gets then put in place that says, please use the sidewalk, trying to encourage the user to follow the rules. But the user does what? The user says, well, if I can't use that muddy side, I'm going to go between the bushes to get to where I need to go. And that's the best part of the slide is there's a woman walking between the bushes because she's like, oh, I can't use my hypotenuse anymore, and I don't want to use my perpendicular lines. I'm going to create a new path and a new path to get there. This is digital. And the most powerful part of this is the user is telling you the story, and the builders are kind of ignoring it. And that's when we think about a transformation effort. That is the importance view of this. So when I get confused at work and how do you prioritize, or which stakeholder who's banging on the table do you listen to, and what do they really think about digital? This is my I don't know what you call it, but one-page image that I remember and think, but that's not what the world is saying. Are we really listening, or are we just trying to hear them out? And there's a distinction there, which I thought would be a good thing for all of you who are thinking about digital anyways. But then let's get to seriousness. The thought process that I've had the last, 10, 12 years, my background is very varied in very different industries, but the world, as it went digital, became where I felt most comfortable, because I think when I was much, much younger, I wanted to be an artist, and the way I found art was in mathematics, and people find that to be very confusing. But there was a flow of logic in my mind. And when you think about digital, it actually bridges those things really well. The cognitive thinking and the way that you think the art and the science kind of blend. And when I think about what's happening now with the world of digital, it's it's hyped up. There's lots of noise. There's lots of confusion. So I'm bringing those confusion to you. One of them is digitization. If I digitize all my documents, am I digital? Did I check off the box? If I get mobile apps up and running and I have really nice web implications, then I've now become digital. I've checked the box. Digital marketing. My corporate comms team has lots of marketing activities. I am a digital company. These are all things I think we would say, yeah, you're kind of getting there, but you're not actually digital yet because you didn't build the sidewalk the way the user wanted it. You built a piece of it. And that's a different story for a digital company, right? There's pieces of a digital company, but not a full one. If I go to transformation, I'm just breaking down our theme for today. Transformation is often considered, I've got to go from legacy to cloud, or I've got to get away from my green screen to something else that's a little bit more prettier. That's a transformation of technology, not a transformation of a company, which is, of course, a precursor to that company, but it doesn't check off the complete box of transformation. Looking for efficiencies. Oftentimes when we look at digital programs, they're measuring efficiencies of something. And I talk really fast, so raise your hand if I'm talking too fast. Efficiency is a bottom line benefit, but if you drive by that, lots of shortcuts get made. And the shortcuts, where do you cut? Where the user thinks that they want to go, not where they supposedly need to be. And then you end up losing the value of that diagonal that I just showed you earlier because there is a faster, cheaper, better way that they're going to use it anyways because I'm going to give them that way. So efficiency is a very tough criteria for success for transformation. There's a lot of, I study failure a lot, and a lot of digital transformation failures are because they use their KPIs on efficiency. The third one I have is it's a program of some type. So I'm standing up a digital transformation program, and the program is going to last 3 to 5 years, and it's going to cost X millions of dollars, and when it's done, we're going to look like this. And it's not, right? We talked about culture just a few minutes ago, and you all mostly raised your hand. It's a completely different thing than a program. And when you talk to the leadership teams of your organization, they'll often try to force it into what they see and understand, which is a program. It's got milestones, it's got specific things you measure, and when it's done, I know exactly what I'm getting. But then how do you know the evolution didn't change in that process? So we try really hard in our company, and oftentimes have a hard time with it, to not call it a program. The bottom three are much more around my pet peeves. Oftentimes, when we think about transformation, there's a perception that it has to come from top down. And there has to be someone at the C level or the CEO or CDO even who has to go to the CEO and then say, the CEO has to say, I want it this way, we want to transform digitally. And we wait for that. Often, when I speak to colleagues across the industries, we speak to a lot of CDOs and they often say, well, we don't have the mandate yet. We're waiting for the mandate. But the mandate is not about to come because the mandate oftentimes is either, when it does come, it's not about go transform and change everyone that does everything because they can't make that call. That's too much of a disruption. I'll give you a quick example of what I mean by that. I don't know if you know about Blockbuster and Netflix, of course you do. But when that shift occurred, Blockbuster, if you remember, did go to the CD and that you could actually take it out and you could go to the store and you could take out a couple CDs like Netflix suggested. They did try it. But they failed because the CFO was told that you've got to reduce all of your, late fees. If you stop all your late fees, which is what Netflix had, it had no late fee revenue stream. If you stop all your late fees, then we can compete. But then now put yourself in the CFO of Blockbuster's point of view. He's going to say, or he did say, I have a $650 million revenue stream for late fees. You want me to shut that down? How do I do that? And that's the question mark when it comes to a program, a top-down expectation is what C-level person would then say, yes, let's go do that right away, who has built their entire, perhaps, portion of their career getting that revenue stream up and running. It's a very tough call. And the last two, we call things strategic a lot, and expectations are that it's going to be visible. That strategy is going to show up somewhere on some deliverable, and it's going to feel great. And oftentimes that's a distraction because I can make things look really pretty, and they don't have to be strategic at all. So there's a thought process on strategic things are perhaps very embedded. They're not necessarily right away visible, and they may be almost contradictory in some cases. The last one is the return on equity. We are part of AXA, and we've been talking quite about the ROE, the equity angle of it, and whether it's ROE or ROE, which is engagement. Do you measure your engagement or do you measure your equity? And how do you drive the KPIs of transformation? So I'm going to quickly go. So when I had to go to my first CEO and say, we want to transform digitally, the first comment was, I don't know what that means, Henna. You've got gadgets, we've got mobile app, we've got a great plan to go cloud, and we're really already digital. And I had to go back and explain in a 2x2 format. This is my X and Y, so this is a very complicated picture in a minute, but I'll explain to you what that means. The X and Ys are really what matter. On the X-axis, you have thinking that is inside, meaning I know what I do. I am by core, a risk management company. That's what I do. I know what that is, and I can evolve on that. I know what that sort of benefit of what I bring to the company or the people that I work with or the customers that I have, and I can evolve on that. That's inside out thinking. So I know what I am. I can do better with that. It's not digital transformation. The right side, or your right side, is outside in thinking, meaning there's someone that wants to walk from here to here, and they really want to go fast, and they want to get to this thing quickly enough so they can go to the doctor's office or whatever they're doing. There's a use case that drives what I'm trying to get at, and that's an outside-in thinking, meaning if I'm a risk management company and my risk is much better served for Boston.org, I'm going to think about that. And that might change me from a risk management company to a risk engineering division that does something completely different, which product suites are very, very unique to what I have today. And that's an outside-in thinking. When I look at the y-axis, on the bottom is unidirectional points of view, which basically means I have a customer. We all have customers, but I meet with them. But it's highly transactional. I look to them when I have renewals, when there's a problem, when there's a concern. I'm very, perhaps even responsive. Service is great. The service scores are awesome, but they're transaction and they're one-off basis. They're not interconnected. They're not building a relationship any greater than perhaps the person at the front line has. And that's a person risk, right? That's not a company or company culture effort. If you go to the very top, the bi-directional one, that's what digital companies do, right? So when we think about things of Amazon or Netflix, it is knowing who we are from the level of us as a person, of how we use something, and they're using that information, which is data, to get to the next evolution of their world. And I'll close, hopefully I'll get to it, I'll close with some of the comments as to what you could be asking yourselves or your teams, or what we ask ourselves as to how do we verify all of this. So we're headed, as a digital transformation world, we're headed to the upper right corner. We want a world where we are highly bidirectional. We have 24/7 continuous partnerships with our customers, our clients, whoever they may be. We are actually not only disrupting what we're doing, we're cannibalizing our prior activities. We have a plan to reduce the prior work that we just finished. That is actual disruption, and that is actual digital companies. They're not waiting for someone else to cannibalize their work. We're doing it ourselves. We actually have a roadmap that thinks about this level of disruption is going to get us to this point, but I want to be able to disrupt that. That's going to get to this point, like the iPhone, right? It disrupts itself. You don't buy another thing that's, well, you could. But now, if you think about it, there's another version of iPhone that shuts down the prior sets of versions because that's where they're headed. And that is what digital forces us to do. You'll have the slides. Don't worry about the photos. So I'm going to keep going. Then the next thing, I'm just closing the loop here on the myths. So if you go back to the other thing, I'm just using equations and greater than less than signs, but digitization is a subset of digital. We talked about that. It's actually when you have embedded intelligence. Your AI, your ability to bring the brain, the mind, and the machine together is embedded. It's not an activity that you go off and do in a project stream. It's embedded. That's digital. When we think about the mobile and gadget, it's not about those little pieces that you go deploy out. It's the frictionless experience, the connectivity that you're bringing to those people, whether it's you and your stakeholders in the company, whether it's you and your customers, whatever it might be. And then we talked about the bidirectional 24/7. I'm going to go to the transformation things. Better technology will only get you so far. It won't get you to the culture that you're raising your hands for. What will get you there is a real thought process on, I have to change my structure, how I get the ideas, how organized my hierarchy is. Because as you know, oftentimes the ones that really want to change what you do are not the top tier people who are holding the fort down. They're the ones that are dealing with the pain all day long. They really want to change that. And they're not the voice of reason that you hear every day. So there's an org structure shift. There's a culture and skill set shift. Many digital transformations fail because they don't evolve the people with the work. They get consultants, hundreds of them, and they build it, and then when the consultants start unplugging, you have a lag in your skill set. So how do you live in the world you just created? And then the program starts to fail, and people think, oh my God, it was just a badly run program. Well, no, because you forgot the major thing of sustainability. Where you're headed, you got to sustain yourself. That's you and the company. So we have to do that piece as well. Running really fast. Long-term sustainability, we just talked about it. It's not a program, it's an evolution. In some cases, it's a revolution where people die, not human beings, but things, maybe legacy screens, green screens. Success, sorry, I have a very bad sense of humor. Success is not top-down. Success happens when you stop having an echo chamber, when you stop listening to all the yeses in the room, when you listen to the no's, and I get a lot of no's in my team, I kind of get more than I need to, but when we get the no's, we know why trust the people that are valued to you, right? But if they're able to say, no, I don't understand, or that doesn't quite make sense, that's the moment you stop and say, listen, I want to know more about what you said. Oftentimes, we hear 2 or 3 yeses, and we run, because there's enough people to validate our thinking, but that's an echo chamber. That's basically saying, I put myself in a room with people that think like me, and we're going to just run with it together. Who's questioning? Where's the yin and yang? Who's the checks and balances? That's really critical when you think about transformation programs like this. So the diversity of thought process, not gender and all that stuff per se, but the thought process of different skills and thinking and sort of maybe even generational gaps, that's really what helps us there. And I'll just quickly run through the next stuff. The irreversibility is pretty critical. It's so critical. It goes back to the embeddedness of it. Transformation is not a program. You want to be somewhere, and you want to stay there, and you want to maybe even evolve even beyond that. So we have to think about how to make it irreversible. And one of our goals in our division has been how do you measure yourself so that irreversibility is the art or the end state. Okay, so I'm going to go with the legends. And what I thought would be helpful is we already know these names. I'm not going to give you a page on each one of them. It would make no sense. You'd have better pages than I can even create. But the top ones I can think of every day is Amazon and Google and Netflix and perhaps Uber and Salesforce and so on. And then the ones that are often written about that have been saved by digital transformation. So the ones that come up last night at 1 in the morning was New York Times, Fidelity, Disney Parks, and Walmart. And they have it for very different reasons, obviously. But you can read about that. One of the things I wanted to share with you was why they are, who they are. Why are they digital? And you'll see in many of them, there is a complete inability to be flexible when it comes to the customer. It is there forever. Their world not only revolves on the customer, but they put themselves in the shoe of the customer constantly. It's not I like this technology, let me see what the customer wants to do with it. It's not that. The starting point is that person that wants to walk from A to B. And how do you build a world around that is pretty important. And then you sit back and say, okay, I get that world now. Well, not of its, I can't put it in my budget. I understand it, but that's my state. Now how do I put that in piece by piece chunks? So in our company, our digital transformation program has 12 dimensions of disruption. We're on the first one for the last 2 years, but that's the biggest one. The team doesn't even know the rest of the 11 because that would be way too much. But at the end of the day, if we focus on that piece and we get to that shifting, that pivot, the rest follows, and that's pretty critical. The other one, well, I kind of mix those two, but existing value chains, number 2 is what I started with, but number 1, existing value chains is we know our inside-out view. How do you now think about it from the outside-in view? That's kind of going back to that x-axis. The third, going back to our culture, our skills, making sure that we're thinking about the environments, not technical environments, the way that we're looking at our conversations, looking at our cross-functionality, which is a common word nowadays, but really, do I have the right representation? Is it technically driven? Is it driven by data? Is it driven by people's businesses and use cases? Are they myopic in their own thinking? You can get the best senior person to do this with you, but if they only see it that way, they want you to digitize that. What if that's not the best practice in the industry going forward? We just we get time, but we barely catch up at that point. And then, of course, thinking of ways to create your disruption, your evolution, or your cannibalization before someone else does it. And the bottom, I'll talk a little bit about the network effect. It's an often misunderstood phenomenon also. Network effect actually will mean when I do this, not only do I get benefit from it, but anyone who joins gets benefit, but the ones that were there previously get even more benefit. like the internet or like a telephone. When you look this up, the two things that come up often is internet and telephone. I can't talk to anybody unless someone else has a telephone, so the network effect of that is the number of people that have telephones that can be on my connection. But the power often that's not valued here, the nuance here, is that they think about it as, well, oftentimes folks think about it as the number of users. It's not the network, it's the effect of that network growing in itself, so it's sort of, what's it called, the word when you self-combusting in terms of its way to get to that hype. Okay, so bringing it to a little bit more format structure. So what are we saying? We're saying digital transformation gets us to thinking about our products, to thinking about our customer, to thinking about the impact of that network for the customer. And there are some pivots that I'm just laying out here. The table stakes of today, those are table stakes, how it could potentially get us to the foundations of what we think are digital, but that doesn't really get us to where we want to be in terms of a digital transformed company. It's really on the right-hand side that actually gets us there. So it's the cyclical evolution of our co-creation model. What our customer wants, what I do. What my customer wants, what do I do? That entire cycle becomes embedded. Looking at our social and emotional physics, that's sort of looking at the network impact. Then, of course, deep neural nets, the world of AI, machine learning, NLP, whatever you want to call it, there's a lot of variety there. But how does that megaphone into the things that we want to be able to do as people that are very creative, minds that are going to be much more intuition-based and so on, that empowerment is pretty critical. And the last one we already discussed. So I'm going to get a little bit more geeky. How much time do I have? A few minutes? 2 minutes? Okay, so let me rush through this. This was where math went wrong. This is where math went right. Math went wrong when it said in the 1800s there was a lot of philosophy on the past actually dictates or determines the future. And in mathematical terms, that's like, x is going to equal y because I know x really well and I can understand what y will do. But in reality, and what digital does, is actually reminds us that's not actually how it works. What happens is there's two things that are actually happening inside that equation itself. There is chaos. There is a pattern, and when that pattern differentiates, which is what digital does, when it differentiates, there's two reasons why it differentiates. One, there was an inherent thing that was creeping up that we ignored, and then we felt like it was chaos, which obviously we shouldn't do. Or we didn't ignore it, we heard it, but when it started to calibrate again, we ignored that. Because we were so busy fixing the chaos, we didn't actually see that there was a pattern emerging somewhere else. And that's all this slide says. I don't want to go into the equation formatting, but that the red line that I'm drawing out there is people look at that piece and they create the whole world from it, and they don't realize that it's truly an evolution process, and we actually have to be a couple steps ahead. That's all it really says. But the bottom, I'm writing it in English. It's not about the data. It's all about the connection that we're building. Okay, too many words. Just look at the X and Y for a moment. Evolution of an organization, it is first and foremost not digital. It's first and foremost data. What do we do with our data? How do we use our data? How do we make that healthier? Then we think about the digital impacts of it, not digitization, the digital impacts of it, and then we think about the disruption of our actual inside out, outside in view. We don't do this, by the way. Most companies think about it as a technical play, and then we think about how technology may push data into it, and then the rest of it supposedly follows. And that's a short-term win, not a long-term evolution. On the y-axis, what's existing and incremental and so on, you will have these slides, I believe. Chris will forward it to you. And then I sort of explain the complexity around it. So bottom line, question that you should ask yourself, is it embedded? Is it sustainable? Are we going to be where we want to be at some point and stay there and evolve from there? What % of every dollar that I'm spending today is brought back to the customer? What do they actually get from what they're paying? That percentage, you can actually track that, hopefully. The third is we're all human beings that are running the show, and most often than not, we're busy and we don't have time for change. So how do we evolve our organizations to create that as it's not fast failure, by the way, that's kind of, am I allowed to swear here? That's not ideal. Fast failure actually can create a different kind of mindset altogether. It's a great philosophy, but it often doesn't work well. We want to think about it, how do you adapt? How do you create voices that want to explain things to you? How do you get them to feel empowered? That's different than fast failure. And the last three are cannibalization, the ROE we talked about, and then of course at the end, how trustworthy are you? How trustworthy do you think as a customer you would be seeing as? And this is just a pendulum. I thought it was kind of cool. But this is chaos theory at its best. It looks chaotic until you find a pattern in it. And that's really what digital is.